So many different views, aren't there, on this? So great to see a few of them. Let's get more reaction to last night's statement. We're joined now by Patrick Roach, the General Secretary of the Teachers' Union, the NASUWT, and the Chair of the BMA Council, Dr. Chan Nagpal. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Morning.
And now, Dr. Patrick Roach, I want to pick up with you because we've just been hearing about schools there. Are schools ready for reception, year 1 and year 6 to come back, perhaps from the 1st of June?
I mean, the fact of the matter is the government has announced a date, but hasn't come forward with a plan about how schools will ensure that they're safe for pupils and safe for staff to be in from June the 1st. And, the Prime Minister said that it would be madness to risk a second spike in relation to transmission of the virus. Well, the profession has got very serious concerns about that announcement of June the 1st, whether indeed it is possible to achieve it, but also how to achieve that in a way which is safe for pupils and for staff.
Well, there's more detail coming out. Apparently, we're going to be speaking to Dominic Raab in about 15 minutes' time. They expect that 50-page of clarification to come around about 2 o'clock today. Would 3 weeks be enough for you if there is more clarity on how to do things? Would that be enough for you and other schools to put in place the ability to bring those 3 years back?
Well, we're going to have to look at what those 50 pages contain. We haven't seen them yet. The reality of the matter is that schools need to ensure that they are properly prepared. And we've seen very strong evidence that schools are lacking in PPE, personal protective equipment, but also the rules in relation to social distancing have not been adequately clarified in a school context. And, if you're dealing with 5- and 6-year-olds and 11-year-olds, how to ensure stringent social distancing in that context is a big challenge. And government simply hasn't answered that challenge. And finally, just in terms of risk assessments, parents will want to know that schools are going to be hygienic, they're going to be safe for their children to be in. And we still don't have any clear standards about what safe cleaning routines would be like within a school context. And we need to have that.
We'll come back to you in a second. Let's also speak to Dr. Chan Nagpal. Thanks so much for joining us. In England, the message has changed from stay at home to stay alert. Are you clear what that means?
I'm not clear, and I'm not sure on what basis the government has made this decision in England. And remember, we should only ease the lockdown when, first of all, we feel it's safe to do so. At the moment, we had more people dying on Saturday than we had at the beginning of the lockdown. So, in fact, we've also seen about 4,000 new cases every day over the weekend. And that's just a fraction of the real number of new cases because of the limited testing. So there's a considerable amount of community circulation of the virus going on. And if we now allow the public to go to local parks in an unlimited sense and to go outdoors, what we've not heard of how the government will enforce social distancing and how it will avoid a whole neighbourhood playing in a park with footballs moving from one group to another and spreading the disease. So I'm really concerned that there is no clarity. And as regards to people going back to work, millions of workers in construction and manufacturing, there's no information of how practically we will be able to ensure social distancing. Many of these workers actually work in an environment where they've got to work in pairs in construction or in teams, and without a risk assessment of those who may be most vulnerable, without any clarity of how personal protective equipment may be necessary in those jobs, and mixed messages about transport to say, well, don't use public transport, and expecting people to have their own transport. We know many don't have their own transport. Many workers in construction actually operate vans and trucks in pairs. They may transmit infection to each other. That infection could be brought home to their families. So we're at real risk without any coherence, without any safeguards, that the infection could have a second surge. And that's our biggest problem. And if people also then travel to any part of the country, because there's no restrictions now, what we might find is infection spreading from areas of high concentration like London into more into areas like holiday areas where at the moment the infection is rather contained. So there are huge risks with a lack of clarity. And remember, the other point about many of the European nations is they've been very clear about the public wearing face coverings. Germany, Italy, Spain, Austria, France, and we've heard nothing from the government about how it will protect the public and how the public will protect each other by preventing spread of the infection should they go out greater than they do now. A lot of unanswered questions. We're very worried.
Do you think there's concern across the medical profession about a potential second spike in COVID cases?
Of course we are. And remember, if we have another spike, we run the risk of just going backwards and creating another surge and overwhelming our health service. We're talking now about the health service resuming some normal services. There are countless patients who've suffered in the last few months from non-COVID situations, and we have no idea how many of those have become seriously ill, and whether the increased death statistics in the community may be made up of patients who do not have COVID but serious illnesses, from cancer through to heart disease, strokes, and so forth. So if we now start to move doctors and services back to normal services, we basically run the risk of overwhelming the health service if we then have to cope with COVID surges in the future. So this really needs to be a very carefully thought out process. We can't rush. And we've got these arbitrary statistics around starting on the 1st of June. Remember, when we had the lockdown, no one would have imagined that we would have ended up with more deaths than the rest of Europe. And I have no idea how the government has come up with these dates of 1st of June, when in fact we don't know the real impact and risk of opening up people going to work without properly thinking through how we will contain the infection in this process.
Let's also, Patrick Roach, if I could just pick up some of those points. And we're going to speak to Dominic Raab, and there will be lots of detail. We understand there's at least a 50-page document. I'm sure both of you will be going through it very carefully. So a lot of people have concerns about, children not in education as well. So there is, in some ways, a sort of delicate balance here, isn't there?
There is indeed, but the reality is that children have remained in some form of education since schools were closed to the generality of pupils. Teachers are working hard, providing access to remote learning opportunities, and late in the day, the government has come forward with other measures, including media and tech companies providing access to online learning resources, and we think that's welcome. But, I think parents and, of course, teachers will be very concerned about any premature rush to reopen schools on an arbitrary date, the 1st of June, which could put the health and safety of children and young people and their teachers and support staff working in schools at risk. And that's why we've been saying that, the government has got to be clear as to what the rationale is for what it proposes to do here, clear in relation to the guidance that it's issuing to schools, and clear about what its expectations are in relation to how schools ensure that they remain safe for children and safe for staff.
Thank you both very much indeed for talking to us, Patrick Roach and Dr. Chand Nagpal. Thank you both for your time this morning on Breakfast.
Just a reminder, we'll be speaking to Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary.